This is episode 66 of the Life in Norway Show. Today I'm joined by Kari Nixon, an American Postdoctoral Fellow at NTNU here in Trondheim. While Kari only moved to Norway this year, her relationship with Norway, and in particular the Norwegian language, stretches back 20 years. You can find out more information on everything we talk about today on the show notes page. Head on over to lifeinnorway.net/podcast and look for episode 66. Happy listening. Today's guest is Kari Nixon. Kari, welcome to the Life in Norway Show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I get a lot of feedback on the podcast, and I know it's been a long time since the last episode. So thank you to everyone for sticking around, and especially everyone who has kept on asking me when the next episode is going to be, because it has made me get myself into gear and arrange a guest. And what a guest we have today, because one of the most common requests I get for the show is for more interviews with people who've just made the move to Norway. I get a lot of personal questions, but my experience is now 10, 11 years old. So I think people want to hear about the experience of moving to Norway today. Kari, you're in that position. You moved to Trondheim this year, but with a twist, a pretty major twist, actually, in that you actually learned Norwegian, the language, and quite a lot about the culture a couple of decades ago.
Yes.
Well before you moved here. So we have a lot to dig into today about that process. But first, let's hear what brought you to Trondheim this year.
Well, I think the shortest, clearest answer is I was offered a 2-year research position at NTNU, which is Norway's science and tech university. I'm actually an English literature professor specializing in medical humanities. So that in itself is a whole issue of what I'm doing at a sci and tech university in their design department. But they have a new initiative to research sustainability at the university. And my particular work package is on using the tools of narrative to develop better sustainability communications. So really, short answer is it was the chance of a lifetime to have 2 years here doing only research. I teach a lot back home in my job as an assistant professor, and I love teaching, but I also miss more time for research. And my job back home said that they would hold my position for me. My husband is a public school teacher, and his job said they would hold his position for him. So we figured, why wouldn't we come and try this for 2 years? I actually earn more as a postdoc here, a postdoctoral fellow, than as an almost tenured professor in America. So there just seemed there was no downside to coming here. We also have little kids, and frankly, the gun violence in America is stressful every day. So to have a couple years off that seemed really great.
So much to unpack there. We'll talk a lot more about Trondheim and what it's like working in the academic environment, amongst other things. But let's go back in time a bit. I mentioned earlier you learned Norwegian as a child, and I know this is something that a lot of Americans do. There's a very American experience of a summer camp. I think we didn't really have these experiences in Britain, and I think I hear summer camp in the movies, and I instantly think American experience. And in the Midwest, I guess it's mostly in the Midwest, maybe that's just a stereotype I have, you have these Norwegian summer camps. So yep. At first, tell us a little bit about the concept of those and why do they exist all the way over in the US?
Yeah. So the camp I went to is called Skogfjorden, which means lake in the woods. And they're run by Concordia College I think they're based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And they have several of these villages. I want to say 15 for different languages. But the Norwegian was the first because there is such a strong Scandinavian ancestry presence in the Midwest. There's a show that you're probably aware of, Alt for Norge.
I actually recorded a podcast a few years back now with a guest from Alt for Norge. I think her name was Kate. It's been many years. I apologize, Kate, if that's not your name. But you can check out that episode in the show notes. I'll include the link if you want to hear a bit more about Alt for Norge. Essentially, it is a purely entertainment show where Americans with some form of Norwegian heritage, in some cases strong, in some cases extremely tenuous, come over to Norway and sort of participate in cultural games and things like that. And not sure if it's still going on, actually. I think it might have finished its run, but there were maybe like 10 seasons, something like that. So yeah. Anyway, you were sort of you were midway through telling us about the summer camps.
Yeah. So there's this pretty large group of people in America with Norwegian ancestry that just feel really connected to it. In fact, I looked into going on to Alt for Norge, but you can't already know about Norway, speak the language and stuff and get on. And so the summer camps are kind of designed to do just that. Mine in particular, with the Concordia language villages, are really invested in teaching the participants about contemporary Norwegian culture. So it's an immersion setting. You pick a Norwegian name when you go there. That's what you're called the whole week, 2 weeks, month. I did my foreign language credit there in high school. So you can go for a month in the summer and get a year's worth of foreign language credit. So that was my language in high school. You are not allowed to have American media or music. We only listen to, in this case, Norwegian, but if you were at the Russian camp, it would be Russian music, or German, it would be German. We eat only Norwegian food. We learn Norwegian dances and Norwegian songs. And in the high school program, especially, you have a whole humanities course of Norwegian things. So while you learn the language really fast, and I knew always that it was quite odd that I grew up speaking Norwegian, particularly because I lived in Texas. I wasn't from the Midwest. What was more odd once we got here is there would be these moments that my husband and I call them my sleeper agent moments. There would be these things that I had learned from 13 years on, because I went on to be a teacher at the high school part of this camp. So I had many years that I spent there, about 10 or so summers. There would be these moments, for instance, if we were walking through Oslo and we would walk by a statue of Christian Krogh. They have the statues of all the famous Norwegians. And all of a sudden it was like this part of my like reptile brain would get activated that I didn't even know I had. And I would just start saying, oh, Christian Krogh, as you know, that he's this famous blah, 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 blah. And I would spout out these facts about Christian Krogh that up to 15 seconds before that, I didn't remember that I knew who that was. And there's similar little things like, I don't know if these are still accurate, but I could tell you that 10 years ago, Norway ate more pizza per capita than any nation in the world, and had more cell phones per capita than any nation in the world, and drank more coffee per capita than any of these little things that just, they feel like this animal part of my brain that they were programmed into me at such a young age. So that's been weird to unpack since we've been here.
Oh, I have so many questions now about that experience. I think the most important question for me here is, was this your choice to go, or was this something thrust upon by your parents? And the reason I ask is the way you describe the camp, it doesn't necessarily sound a fun prospect. It kind of sounds a little bit like a punishment to some people. Like, you're not allowed American media, you're not allowed, you can only speak Norwegian. And I'm not sure I would have enjoyed the prospect of that as a kid. What age are we talking about here as well?
I was 13 when I started going, but most kids start going at 6.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes.
It's everybody has the goal of being a 10-year villager, which means you have to go when you're like 6 or 7 to be able to make it 10 years. We call it a village and villagers. I suppose it could sound, I make it sound quite regimented because I'm explaining it from sort of a hindsight mentality of the curriculum that I now am a teacher of, or have been. But no, I have to give the camp its credit because Kids do come initially, and I think it's always the parents, especially with Norwegian. I mean, I think maybe Spanish, French, you might get kids wanting to learn that for other reasons. I think Norwegian is so often the parents, and the kids are a little bit, they don't know what to expect. But the Norwegian village of all the villages actually has the highest retention rate. So it's all done through fun and play. And it's honestly some of the best experiences of my life. Can I run you through a typical day?
Absolutely. Go right ahead. I'm fascinated.
Okay. So instead of alarm clocks, the children are woken up with, whatever the most recent like Norwegian hits are, like piped gently through a PA system. And there's some classics in there too. Like to this day, I know at like the dive bars in Trondheim, I know 1990s DeLillo lyrics better than the old Norwegians. So we do the classics too. And then we all go to, now this is kind of American. I didn't know this until I met enough Norwegians. We always raise the Norwegian flag every day. And that's apparently quite patriotic in an American way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
But we sing the Norwegian national anthem every morning. And then we go up to breakfast, which is either smørbrød, the open-faced sandwiches, or granola and yogurt, muesli. And after that, there's language class, and everything is through play. So I'm teaching my daughters and my husband right now, actually using the curriculum. So, we might teach the body parts and then we play Simon Says. And so it's just a game, but you're learning the Norwegian words through, games. Oh, I skipped singing time. Between breakfast and language time is, singing time, all song. And that's actually probably the most important ingredient, because we know cognitively people learn language patterns best through song. And to this day, if I'm trying to remember what preposition goes with what verb and what noun, because prepositions are fully idiomatic, there's not a rule. And English has 80 prepositions and Norwegian has 5. It's very hard to get. I'll never be native at it, but I'll still go back to some of the songs I learned as a 13-year-old and remind myself what prepositions they're using. It also prepared me very well. And their whole goal is to prepare students to come over and be an exchange student in Norway or go to college here or move here. And honestly, being 36 now, I was shocked at the extent to which it did prepare me. I knew the little elementary school anti-bullying song that they all sing because I learned it at Skolefjorden. So when my daughter came home from the first day of school, I could sing it with her and I was ready and she didn't feel as outside. At the end of the day, we sing the song that barnehager, daycares use at the end of their day, or they did at that time. So I grew up knowing that. So the songs are really important. After language time, we do, the kids rotate every other day through 5 different cultural learning times. So they'll get 2 hours in different cultural themes. So one is friluftsliv. And literally, we just teach them that Norwegians love being outside. So we go outside a bunch. That was always my least favorite. I was very American in that way. And I also, it's funny, I thought they were kind of overstating the case most of my life. You can't just tell us to go outside and say that's Norwegian, but it is.
It really is.
Yeah. We have a little series of immigrant homes that have been moved there from their original location. And so we teach them about the reasons that Norwegians immigrated to America, what that was like. Nowadays, we connect that to the number of immigrants moving to Norway. And we try to teach them about Norway not really being the homogenous society people assume it is. So we do this really cool connection between the immigrants out of Norway to America and now from around the world to Norway. And for my part, I came from a really conservative American home. And it was a really important part of my upbringing to learn to have an open mind and heart towards immigrants and to respect that Norway has these open more open borders that I am now currently making use of as an immigrant, or an expat, I guess you would say. Let's see. One of them is about Viking culture and what that meant. We've recently added Sami culture. I say recently, but this is like probably 20 years ago now, which I think was great for them to do because I would have never known that, as a child about that. And I'm missing one, but we'll just leave it at that. Oh, the other one is whatever cultural issue is important in Norway at that time. So it's often maybe like climate change and what Norway is doing about climate change, or what does it mean for Norway to be this progressive sustainability nation when it is founded on oil? And we talk about those things. So you can see it's actually, it's a very in-depth learning experience. And most of it is through simulations and games. There's always an evening program. We always do like a Eurovision or Norge har talent, whatever's popular in Norway at that time. And when they did Norge har talent, I was always I pretended to be this judge from Bergen. And so I would do this like very bad Bergen dialect. So they're learning about the dialects, like little bits here through these talent shows, which is basically just a kid's talent show in Norwegian. So there's more to it, but that's sort of like the big overview of the day.
Let's fast forward 20 years then. During that time, or it's taken 20 years for you to actually arrive now in Norway. Had you been trying all that time to find a job here? And also, were you doing any work to maintain that language ability and that knowledge of Norway?
Yeah, yes to both. I don't know that I was applying for jobs every year, but as I said, the goal of the camp, their stated goal is, I think the second year they want to teach you how to travel to Norway and be able to survive. The third year, they want to teach you how to study in Norway and so on. And really, in some ways, I always felt a bit like the black sheep of this community because, as I said, they have a high retention rate. So it's a very tight-knit group. And I was one of the few people who never made it over to Norway. I think one reason that I became very obsessive as a adolescent and young person in my 20s about improving my Norwegian language abilities as well as I could was because I was sent to this camp, but my home life was not great, to put it mildly. And I think this summer camp became one of the only safe places for me in my life where I was fed healthy meals regularly and taught the benefits of exercise and just, treated, it was a safe place for me. But because of that home life, I never had the resources to do a study abroad or to go to travel for folkehøyskole. I was homeless in undergrad. And so I was just trying to have a roof over my head. And so I always felt kind of left out. Everybody else, for the most part, the people that went to the camp and worked at the camp, they eventually, a lot of them moved here permanently, but many of them studied here for a long time. And so it always seemed like I was the one who couldn't get here. I was able to come for 4 weeks during my dissertation year. I have a chapter or two in my dissertation on Ibsen, although I by no means am I a Scandinavian literature specialist. I study him sort of as a spin-off of the Victorian novelists that I mostly study. And I was able to come here for a month, and that was the only other time I'd been able to get here. I got a Sons of Norway grant, actually, and I had a friend from Skofjorden. We all sort of have open door policies for each other. If you're in Norway, you can just stay with whoever from Skofjorden is there. And I think, but after that, that was 10 years ago, I sort of gave up. I thought, I'm too old for folkehøyskole. My time has passed. I tried for a while to get a førsteamanuensis position here, but it's very hard to break into the Norwegian academic market. But I finally did, with the temporary position, and the stars just sort of aligned with our job back home to make that reasonable to come for a temporary thing.
And when you arrived in Trondheim this year, how was your how was your experience of using Norwegian out in the wild? We have there is a pretty strong dialect here in Trondheim, although I guess in the academic community, you're probably working with people from all over Norway and all over the world to some extent now. Were you able to be understood from day one? Could you understand everyone else from day one?
Yes. I think
I'm sensing a but there.
Oh, no, I was debating whether I should just answer you in Norwegian briefly to show my accent, which most Norwegians think is like insane. I'm not perfect, but it's really impressive what this summer camp does. And like you say, I'm this weird twist. I call myself like the Borat of Norway. Like I've been learning about this tiny country for so long and never got here. And given that, it's really quite astounding. I really can't believe that this little summer camp curriculum is so great. But there was a while where I'm kind of hard on myself. I want my Norwegian to be so good. When I was 13, for instance, I emailed the UN. I don't even know how in 1999 I found their email address. These things were not as findable then. And I was like, I am going to be your next Norwegian translator. And they were like, that doesn't exist. We don't hire that. And I locked myself in my room for 3 days crying. My favorite activity as a teenager was to lock myself in my room with the like Sissel Kyrkjebø CD that I had. And I wasn't allowed to come out until I could say all the lyrics without my tongue getting messed up. Like this has been such a part of what I wanted for so long that even though I'm like more tempered in that now as a grown-up, I can be really hard on myself about the language. So when I first got here, I spent a few weeks being like, I think I lied to myself my whole life. I do not understand Norwegian. I could be understood, but I felt like I didn't understand. Like people were talking Danish, I felt like. And but then I was sitting next to my department chair one day, and I was being a little bit nicer to myself that day. And I realized I could understand absolutely everything she said. And I was like, where are you from? And she said, Oslo. And of course, we learn Oslo dialect at the camp. And that's when I was like, oh, I'm not a terrible fool, like who's been lying to myself. I'm in Trondheim, which is like the most notorious. Like I've known this. I've known my whole life that Trøndersk is hard to understand. And yet I kind of forgot about it and was really hard on myself for a few weeks. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk a bit about Trondheim. Your first impressions of living here.
Oh, I visited here on that trip when I was mostly in Oslo for 4 weeks, but I visited Trondheim for 2 days 10 years ago. And I told myself, I want to live here. I love Trondheim. And it's so cool to actually be in like the one city that I loved best in Norway. But first impressions, 2 days does not knowledge of a city make. I was here 2 days in March. And I actually had no idea how much it rained in Trondheim. I feel a little bit ignorant for not having realized that. Because growing up, it was Bergen. Bergen's what you talk about. Like there's a Knutsen and Ludvigsen song about like it's vått og kaldt og breiflapp overalt. Like nobody talks about Trondheim raining all the time. And in the summer was so rainy and that I got a little... That was hard. I was like, what have we done? I was promised this beautiful summer because 90% of Norwegian music is about the glories of Norwegian summer. I was a little disappointed. 10 years ago when I was here, I was shocked by how much I hated Norway. I wanted to come home every day because I heard this from a Norwegian. It was another expat. The more you idolize Norway, the more you're disappointed when you get here and realize that they, in fact, have their own culture and norms that are not necessarily what we expect. And so when I was here in my 20s, I remember just finding everybody so cold. The stereotypes you hear, they're not friendly. Nobody will talk to me. Of course, I was coming from Texas, so I talked to everybody sort of superficially. And now we came here this time and I was like, okay, we're going to be prepared to be hermits After COVID, I lost all my social skills. I'm ready to be in a place where nobody talks to me. It's going to be great. And we're moving from Washington at this point, which is basically a miniature Norway. It was really Norway with training wheels for us. And we got here and everybody's so friendly. Like sometimes I want people to talk to me less. Like I feel like I'm more Norwegian than the Norwegians. So that was probably my biggest culture shock is, I'm certain from 25 to 35, I have changed a lot. But there's also differences that I think I've learned that being in Norway with children is it opens so many more social opportunities for you. And so I would still say that to people moving here, I think it will be a shock for you if you're childless.
That's a really interesting point, Kari, and I don't remember ever bringing that up on the show before. But I couldn't agree more. You see it with people just out in the street, stopping, chatting as their children know each other. So you're sort of forced to get to know these people. And without children, there's a lot of sports clubs and volunteer organizations that are kind of centered around those things. And it is actually a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I wonder actually if part of the reason you found people more friendly this time around is because of the academic environment. I don't know, but could that be something to do with it?
It's helping because I have natural colleagues that I could meet there at work. But I really think aside from whatever ways I've just grown up, and I think some people have suggested that Norwegians are a bit more friendly after COVID because they miss people. The biggest thing I think is the kids because and this is related, I think this will be good for people moving here because people warn you that it'll be so cold and it will be. But if you're moving here with kids, as you say, I think, and I would never have had to confront it if I hadn't done it just the two ways and seen the difference because the Norwegians have such an insistence that like children never be left out of anything, which is beautiful. It's also part of why they can be hard to get to know as adults because they've often had the same 10 friends since they were in preschool. So they're not actually unfriendly. They just have their circle and they maybe haven't made a new friend as a grown-up in a long time. And so coming here with a 5 and a 7-year-old, we're on the ground floor of that. And all the parents have been honestly sort of beside themselves, trying to almost working themselves up in a panic, finding our phone number, making sure we're invited to all the birthday parties because God forbid. Whereas in America, we have a little bit more of a competitive attitude. Like it's catch as catch can. You find your friends, you get popular or else. So I just think, and I've heard also, if you move here with kids in middle school and older, it's hard again. Those kids have a very difficult time. So, and then I'll just say one more thing. We accidentally moved to this tiny, tiny little area in Trondheim called Leon. And I think that helps as well because it's basically a little village. And I mean, we can just walk down the road and I'm not even speaking, but everybody knows I'm the American and they'll come and tell me that they know I'm the American and they know whose house I'm living in. And so I think, if we were living in the middle of downtown in a large apartment complex, it would not be that way either. But that's also a tool that somebody could use if they're wanting to move here and they know they're very extroverted. Ironically, I would move to the little isolated areas, which is kind of counterintuitive,
These are some really interesting tips you're giving us here, Kari. And this is why I think it's been so good to speak to somebody who's just moved here because, like you were saying, perhaps things are a little different after COVID. And it's very hard for someone who's been here so long to really notice these changes. So now you've been in Trondheim a little while. What are your favorite things to do in the city or around the city?
Oh, that's a great question. I've really gotten to know friluftsliv for the first time in my life. I can be a really nervous person, and I was always too scared to walk alone in the woods in the US. whether that's an accurate fear or not, it's my fear. And so feeling safe here it's been cool to walk outside. I never do that.
And we should say in Trondheim, you can jump on the tram from the city centre and in 20 minutes you're in the forest.
Yes.
And you've got hiking trails, and it's the same on the bus in the other direction. It's very easy to access nature here in Trondheim, and honestly, in every Norwegian city, including Oslo, it's the same.
Yeah, the infrastructure, they build it so that is simpler, and that's been really neat. What else have we done? I've been going to the theater a lot, the movie theater, which I know sounds really boring and not a very sort of Norwegian answer, but number one, a huge reason we moved here that I sort of forgot to mention up front is that I needed a better work-life balance. After COVID, a lot of us sort of were thinking, what do we really want out of life? And I know Norway they promote a better work-life balance. And so I have time to go to movies for the first time in half a decade. But I have been shocked at the sort of thriving Norwegian film industry that I've found. And that I had no idea. And I have no idea how recent that is. But in just the last 2 weeks, I've seen 2 completely fully Norwegian produced film, one for adults with live action and one, the Tegneserie, the illustrated one to Tina about a little dog. It's so cute. All adults should go see it. It's very adorable. I was shocked. I mean, illustrating an animated feature is a huge endeavor. And to think that Norway was able to do that, I mean, I just think it seems like maybe in some ways they're really coming into their own as like a media producer. But perhaps maybe this isn't that new and I'm just sort of uninformed because I'm new here.
I'm not sure. I think there has definitely been developments in film. The country has put a lot of investment into attracting bigger productions here through tax breaks and things like that. That's why, for example, in the recent James Bond film, there were several scenes shot in Norway, and countless other films recently. They often use the areas down by the fjords. There's the famous glass-walled hotel near Geiranger. The name escapes me of the hotel now, but that's been used in several films recently. And all this was a very deliberate attempt to increase the number of international productions. But generally, I'm not sure. I mean, since I've lived here, there's always been Norwegian films on at the cinema, just as many as international movies. They just don't always get an international release. That's the thing. And with streaming services being more popular now, you've got it's Netflix and HBO and companies like that funding productions now, which means they automatically get an international release. So perhaps it is perception in part, but also it's the rise of the streaming services. Like just this morning, I published the trailer for a movie called Troll, which is coming up on the December 1st on Netflix. And that's a big budget monster movie. And, that's the kind of movie, it's made in English, and that wouldn't have been made 10 years ago, I don't think, in English. But because it's Netflix picking up the bill, then it's in English, but it's a very Norwegian story. So, yeah, I'm sort of down a rabbit hole here, but it is an interesting area.
I'm trying to also go to I haven't done it yet, but I have been attempting to go to concerts because I've actually pretty much never been to a concert in my life because all the people I listened to were Norwegian, and now I'm finally here. So I just bought tickets to a Lars Vaular concert in January because I like some of his stuff, and trying desperately to get into a Carpe show because I am verifiably their biggest American fan. And if they would ever like to marry me, I'm definitely willing to leave my husband, and he knows this. So make sure you put that out and get them to listen. So, I think the media and the contemporary culture is something I've really enjoyed getting to know. I like going to the malls here. There's this, God, this sounds kind of dystopian. There's this familiarity with capitalism and retail, but it's toned down a little bit from its rampant, unbridled nonsense that I'm used to in America. So there's this cognitive dissonance that is solved for me by just wandering through the malls, which sounds really weird, but I just kind of like it. Yeah. Oh, and we love going on day trips and looking at the Stavkirke and like other like historical things. We really love history. So like wandering around and taking a little day trip and looking at the stuff around, and the Nidaros, the cafe there. My husband and I meet there once a week for lunch because we just think maybe it's a little touristy, but it's just so pretty.
So I think what a lot of listeners right now are thinking is they don't have the opportunity to go to a summer camp when they were, a teenager. Those years have gone. Is it still possible for them to learn Norwegian before moving to Norway? And I ask this because I do hear from a lot of people who study Norwegian. Maybe they take an online course, or maybe they are actually able to go to a class in a city somewhere, learn Norwegian to a certain level, and then they move here and they feel like they're starting again from scratch. That's a very common story.
Really?
So for someone who doesn't have that opportunity to go to a summer camp, that intensive process like you did, can you offer any advice over how to learn the language on a useful basis, so you're actually able to use the language when you arrive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about this a lot because on TikTok, sometimes I'll post a video very briefly with my story and I'll show my Norwegian. And like I've said, the Norwegians are quite surprised. And sometimes I'll get these comments that say, well, this is really cool because Norwegian is one of the hardest languages to learn. And I'll usually push back and say, I've always heard it's the easiest for English speakers to learn. And somebody got into a conversation with me and I think they nailed it. They said on paper, grammatically and with the vocabulary, Norwegian is so easy to learn because it's 65% cognates. There are very few grammatical rules that differ. They don't have cases, but it's the spoken language that, first of all, they don't have an official national spoken language. They have all the dialects. And second of all, even when we're talking about Oslo dialect, something like Oslo does not sound the way it looks on paper. So I think what I'm hearing both from my conversations and what you've said is that it's easy to learn the language on paper, and then it doesn't feel like it sounds like what you were taught. And I've been watching my husband learn it through Duolingo, and there's little things where I tend to say, and Norwegians will say this too, Norwegian is so phonetic. It's so easy to learn to read it the way it sounds. And I think that's mostly true. But the other day he was reading the word D, like they, the word they. And he was like, that should be day. That according to the phonetics you've taught me. And I was like, what are you even talking about? I had to come read it to be like, oh, no, that's D. I don't know why. It just is. So what I would say, and this is where it's easier today, as you say, because when I was learning and trying to get like a song from like Bjelleklang on Napster, I didn't even like Bjelleklang, but if I could download a Norwegian song, it was better than nothing. The way they say everybody in Norway, and I think even people like Mila Kunis learn such good English is through the TV. And so I think in the age of streaming media, if you can get, gosh, even like 7 years ago, we were trying to get like region unlocked DVD players. It wasn't even that easy then. But now, I mean, you can get NRK radio anywhere on your internet. You can turn all your computer apps to Norwegian. I've seen people do that. So their daily Facebook, where they're cognitively, well, that's not, you're not hearing then, but that is one tip. Listening to NRK, I used to just get my news through that, and I would have to like learn the sounds, and eventually you start picking it up. But songs are a great way too. I really stand by the value of pop music, because pop music, especially, it's catchy and repetitive. We know cognitively that it sticks in your head. And then you're hearing often things in dialect, but the accent is a little thinner. You know how like Mumford and Sons, they sing American folk music, but they're British, but you wouldn't know that if you heard. So sometimes the accent thins out to like a moderate place where you're getting used to it in song. but you're not overwhelmed by it. I think pop music is a really great way. And there's a Spotify list called like Top 50 in Norway. A lot of it will just be Ed Sheeran, but I just say no to those and make it play just the Norwegian ones. And, just ride around playing it in your car, and your ear gets more and more attuned to those sounds. So it's not like shocked by them. If you already know the word, right? If you've already learned Norwegian, then you just need to accustom yourself to hearing it sound a little bit different.
I think, Kari, this has been perhaps the most useful podcast episode we've had for someone who's about to move to Norway. It's been absolutely crammed with tips and useful little bits of information about adjusting to life here. So thank you very much for this. I'd love to talk for another hour, to be honest, but we've been chatting away for quite some time already, and it is time to wrap things up. And I'm going to do that with the same 3 questions I ask guests on the Life in Norway show. So some quick answers to these, please. What is the best thing about living in Norway?
Safety and security.
And what do you find most challenging about life here so far?
There can be rigid expectations of how you should already know the right way to act.
Oh, that's a really interesting observation. Final question. That this can be a whole town or a tiny spot somewhere hidden away. What is your favorite place in Norway?
Trondheim Torg.
The shopping mall?
The Torg, the square.
The square, okay.
Yeah, and the mall.
Fantastic. Kari, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find out more about you and what you're up to? You mentioned TikTok. I'm not sure how TikTok works, but is there like a handle you have on there or something like that?
I have my handle is @diseasedocphd. And I have a website, karinixon.com, which can direct you to my Twitter, where I'm also pretty active.
Excellent. Kari, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you so much.